Good afternoon. This is Algebra 2. We're going to do characteristics of quadratic functions, the equations. I'm going to wait just a few minutes to see if anyone decides to come on. Let's see, I think I have someone watching. Claire. Hey, Claire. This will be a very good video for you to make sure you watch live, because this one's it's not as easy as some of the ones we've been doing. And I see you've already started the IXL lesson that goes with it, but it looks like you're stuck, so maybe this will help. Everyone. This is advanced algebra. Oops, my laptop was talking. Alright, let's see. Oh, I have my computer on the wrong thing. Hang on just a second. Hayden Coker, are you going to do some Algebra 2? We're going to wait just a minute longer. I'm getting my laptop up so I can see comments. We'll wait to see if anyone else is going to join for this wonderful Algebra 2 lesson. I love Algebra 2. It's my favorite subject. Are you going to do some Algebra 2? There it goes, talking to me again. Alright, we're about ready to get started. I'm going to see if I can... Favorite subject. Oh, there it goes again. Okay. Alright, let's get started. In this lesson, we're dealing with quadratic functions. Quadratic functions form parabolas. And the last lesson we did involved you looking at a graph of a parabola and picking out the y-intercept, the vertex, the minimum value. And so now we're still going to be looking at that stuff, but instead of looking at the graph and picking it out, we're going to look at equations and learn how to find those things from an equation. Eventually we're going to get to where we can take an equation and pick out those key points, like our vertex and our y-intercept, and plot them on a graph so we can draw the parabola ourselves. Alright, so yeah, you are the only one on here now, Claire, so you'll have a private lesson. So let's just go ahead and get started and look at this. You've got standard form. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals y. And we're used to seeing it with y equals. So I'm going to write it this way. Y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. The first thing I want to make sure you understand is I underlined the a, b, and the c because these are going to be numbers. Sometimes you won't have a number in front with your x squared. Sometimes your a and your b and your c may be missing. But those are the numbers that we're going to be looking at. The number in front of our x squared is always a. The number in front of our x is always b. And the number that's out here by itself that's not attached to an x is going to be your c. Now the easy thing to pick out in an equation is the y-intercept, because the y-intercept is always c. And I'm going to pause for a second and let you write that down, because that's important to know in your standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c. The c down here at the end is always your y-intercept. And so knowing that, I've got two examples here, and both examples deal with finding your y-intercept. What I did in this lesson is I went through the IXL lesson myself. I went all the way through it to a score of like 90-something to make sure that I put down everything that you'll need for those problems. So I've done an example like every one that you'll see on IXL. And you'll start off with y-intercept. So like example 1 says find the y-intercept in y equals 2x squared plus 5x minus 7. And I'm just pausing to give you time to get that written down if you're writing things down. All right, so and make sure you read your directions carefully when you get to your IXL. It says find the y-intercept. The y-intercept is always c, which is always this number at the end. So it's just going to be this -7. So your answer would just be -7. And that's the way you would enter it. You don't have to put y equals. You just put -7. Isn't that easy? Now, let me go back and explain why the y-intercept is always this number at the end. If you'll think back to when we did linear equations, which are lines, when you're finding the y-intercept, the x-coordinate is always 0. So, and it's the same here. Like your y-intercept is always found by letting the x-coordinate equal 0. Well, if you let your x-coordinate equal 0, you just plug 0 into these x's right here. And if you're going to multiply 2 times 0 squared plus 5 times 0, all of that has the x attached to it, because x is 0, just disappears. And you're left with y equals -7 when you plug a 0 into x. So that's why the y-intercept is -7. So, and that's going to always be the case. You just always plug 0 into your x when you're trying to find the y-intercept. But it's always going to work out in these problems, no matter how many terms are in it, that your y-intercept is going to be just that number, that c, at the end. All right, so here's example 2. Find the y-intercept in y equals -x squared plus 3x. Now here we have the x squared and the x, but we don't have a constant at the end. So we don't have a c. We have, this is a, and this is b, but there is no c. And if there is no c, that means your y-intercept is 0. Okay? Again, if you want to think of y at 0, if I were to tell you to find your y-intercept, that means x is always 0 no matter what. And if you plug a 0 into this x, all of that worked out is just going to give you 0. Okay, so again, you just put in the number 0. All right, don't write this down. I'm just going to look at it, or let you look at it for a second and make sure that you understand. If you have y equals 2x squared plus 5x minus 9, and I were to tell you to find the y-intercept, what is the y-intercept? I'm going to give you just a second. This is delayed, so I won't be able to see your answer. But just type in for me, Claire, if you know what the y-intercept is in that problem. It'll take me just a few seconds to see your answer. Very good. 9 is correct, except make sure you take the sign in front of it. So it would actually be a -9. All right, so that's the y-intercept. Next thing it's going to ask you is about the axis of symmetry. Now remember, on a parabola, the axis of symmetry, we discussed this when we were doing the graphs the other day. If you have a parabola, the axis of symmetry is that vertical line that cuts it into two mirror images. And so to find that axis of symmetry, you have to use a formula. And here's the formula right here. Axis of symmetry. Here's the formula. X equals -b over 2a. So jot that down. That's important. Axis of symmetry. This is how you find it. And it's always going to be x equals because it's a vertical line. And then you find your number by putting in negative b over 2a. Okay, so once you have that formula down, I'm going to go to the next page that has an example of how to find the axis of symmetry. Okay, here's our example. It says find the equation, and notice the way I wrote this because like when we were doing the y-intercept, you only had to enter the number. Well, this time you have to enter the equation, and that's why I wrote find the equation, because it's always going to have to be x equals and then the number you get. Now, when you're finding the axis of symmetry, you can't just look at your problem and tell what it is. You have to use that formula. So remember, I'm going to write the formula down again. It's going to be x equals negative b over 2a. Now, what you've got to remember is how to find a and b. You don't have to have c in this formula, just a and b. Remember, a is the number in front of x squared. So I'm just going to come over here and say a equals 1. And b equals the number in front of the x in the middle. So b is going to equal 6. So when you know that a is 1 and b is 6, you just fill into that formula. So I'm going to come over here to work it. And it says, it's going to say x equals negative b is going to be negative 6 over 2a. A is 1, so it's going to be 2 times 1. The parenthesis just means times. And so that's going to equal negative 6 over 2. And when you divide that, you get negative 3. So in the blank on IXL, you would enter x equals negative 3. And make sure you put the whole equation in. Let me move this over. That was over a little bit too far. So do you understand that? You need me to go back over that one? Just type yes if you understand it. And if you need me to go back over it, I will. You still with me, Claire? You may not be here anymore. I'm just going to go on because you may not be watching it any longer. Oh, you're there. Yay. Okay, you understand it. So let's go on to part B. We got part B and part C to do. All right, so y equals x squared minus x, part B. Remember, on these three, A, B, and C, we're finding the axis of symmetry. So we're going to do negative b over 2a again. Let's first of all, before we actually write anything else down, let's go ahead and identify a and b. A is going to be the number in front of x squared, so a is going to equal 1. And b is going to equal the number in front of the x, which is negative 1. Make sure you use the minus that's in front of it. So b is equal to negative 1. Alright, so our formula for finding the axis of symmetry is x equals negative b over 2 times a. So I'm just going to fill in. Now, negative b, and we've already got a negative with this b, so I'm going to write negative, and then in parentheses, now this negative right here is the negative in the formula. Now I'm going to write the negative 1 in parentheses, and that's going to eventually make it positive, over 2 times a, which is 2 times 1. So that is, oh, I can't go over to C. I was about to mess up and go over here. Let me go down here. That's going to be, the opposite of a negative 1 is positive 1. So it's going to be x equals 1 over 2 times 1, which is 2. So you get x equals 1/2. Now, I believe on these IXL lessons, they don't give you one of those fraction boxes to type in. You'll just type it in as x equals 1 and then the slash key and then 2. Yeah, I see it eventually. It's just really, really delayed on my end. Okay. I'm glad you're still here though. I like teaching to somebody. All right. Now we've gone over the y-intercept. We've gone over the axis of symmetry. And now we're going to go over how to find the vertex. Now the vertex is an ordered pair. You're always going to get, let me write right here. You're always going to get some number for x and some number for y, and you're going to enter it in an ordered pair form. Whoops, I just messed my paper up. Now, so what I'm going to do is show you how to find the x and the y. What this means, the reason I've got f of x is, remember, f of x means the same thing as y, but it always means that it's the answer you get for y when you plug x in. So I've got arrows drawn showing you what the x coordinate is. The x coordinate in your vertex is the number that you get from the axis of symmetry. Okay, and that's what we just did in example 3. So whatever you get for your axis of symmetry is the number that you put here in front. Then when you plug that number into your original problem and get the answer for y, that's your y coordinate, and that's why it's written as f of x. In this arrow right here, I've got the answer you get when you plug the x into the equation. Alright, so the first number is going to be the number from the axis of symmetry. The second number is going to be the answer you get when you plug that x coordinate in to the equation. Now I know that doesn't make a whole lot of sense till you see it worked. So let's work it right here. I'm going to pause just a second because we're going to be doing some fractions, and I want to make sure that I know fractions is hard for some of you, so I'm going to plug it into the calculator to help you kind of see where I'm getting my answer. And I've got to go get my calculator, so just sit tight for just a second. Alright, well, Kathleen borrowed my calculator, and so I don't know where it is. She's looking for it, but anyway, I'll go ahead and work it, and then if you don't know where I get my answers, you can just always plug into your calculator if it has a fraction key. Okay, so we're going to find the vertex, and here's our equation. Y equals x squared plus 3x minus 1/2. The first thing that you want to do is find your axis of symmetry. Oh, I just found it. Alright, so we're going to find our axis of symmetry. Remember, that's found by doing x equals negative b over 2a. So the first thing you want to do is plug into this. Let's identify a, b, and we don't really have to tell what c is. A is going to equal 1 because that's the number in front of x squared. B is going to equal 3 because that's the number in front of x. So when we plug into negative b over 2a, That is going to be negative 3 over 2 times 1. Okay, so when you simplify that, you get x equals negative 3 over 2. And you just leave it like that. Make sure you leave it in, well, I don't know, you'll have to read the directions on IXL. I don't know if it tells you to enter things in fraction form or decimal form. It may say both. But, all right, so now we're finding the vertex, and what we did is we just found the x-coordinate, which is negative 3 over 2, because the x-coordinate is always going to be the number in your axis of symmetry. Now, to find the y, we've got to take this amount and plug it into x in our original equation to get that y. All right, so I'm going to come down here and just say y equals x squared. And our x is negative 3 over 2, so I'm going to put negative 3 over 2 squared plus 3 times x, which is going to be 3 times negative 3 over 2, and then minus 1/2. Now, if you have a calculator that has a fraction key on it, all you do is type in exactly what you see here. I'm going to show you that on my calculator to make sure you know how we're typing it in. So, let me zoom in just a little so you can see this. Alright, so I'm going to put in parentheses, negative 3 fraction 2. Close my parentheses. Uh-oh. You see what that did? I want my parentheses to go around the whole fraction, so move the cursor to the end of the whole fraction, then put your parentheses. Then square it. And then I believe it was, what, plus 3 times negative 3 over 2. So plus 3 parentheses negative 3 over 2. And then at the end it's minus 1 over 2. Alright, so you can see this. Hopefully you can see it there. You just type in exactly what we have on paper with your fractions. Hit equals, and it gives you your answer, negative 11 over 4. So y equals negative 11 over 4. That's your y coordinate. So that's the second number in your parentheses, negative 11 over 4. Remember, if they don't give you the fraction box, which I don't really know, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, but if they don't give you the fraction box, you just type in the slash key, the division, if you're using your phone, I guess you'll use the division key. It's either the division key or the slash key if they don't have a fraction box. And that is your answer for your vertex, that ordered pair right there. Do you have a calculator that has a fraction key on it? If you don't, the internet will have one, I'm pretty sure. Don't use Mathway calculator. Use a regular calculator. Okay. Moving on to example 5. Oh, I zoomed in on the calculator. That's why it's so big. All right. There we go. Okay. So we're still going to, just because that's a little bit harder, finding the vertex, we're going to do 2 more examples with finding the vertex. All right, so example 5, I don't believe this one will involve fractions, so this one will be easier. Find the vertex in y equals x squared minus 2x minus 15. Remember, the vertex, always look in your directions to see what it is you're finding. It's either going to be the y-intercept, the axis of symmetry, the vertex, or the minimum value, which we're going to do down here. So for the vertex, you have to start out with the formula, negative b over 2a. That's going to be your x coordinate. So let's identify a and b. A is going to equal the number in front of x squared, which is 1. B is going to equal the number in front of the x, which is, make sure you put the minus with it, that's going to be negative 2. And so now the x coordinate for our vertex is going to be x equals negative b, which is negative 2, over 2 times a, which is 2 times 1. Alright, so that is going to equal positive 2 over 2, which is just going to be 1. So we're going to get x equals 1. That would be our axis of symmetry, but it's not what it asked for. It asked for the vertex. Okay, so we have found the x coordinate in our vertex, but now we got to find the y coordinate. And to find the y coordinate, you just plug this number that you got for x back into the original problem in place of x and work it out. So we're going to get y equals, this is going to be much easier with a 1 plugging it in, 1 squared minus 2 times 1 minus 15. I gotta move this over a bit. There. So let's work that out. We're going to get y equals 1 minus 2 minus 15. So that's going to be y equals 1 minus 2 is negative 1, and negative 1 minus 15 is negative 16. That's our y coordinate. So we put it together in ordered pair form. I'm going to write it up here, which is going to be 1 comma negative 16. So that's what you would enter into the box on INXL. In this work, finding the vertex, if it's a little confusing, that's fine, because, you know, this gives students trouble sometimes because there's a couple of steps involved. Just make sure you know how to use your formula, negative b over 2a, and then you just take that answer and plug it into your original equation and work it out. Here's one more for the vertex. Example 6. And you will, Claire, you will have, because I went through several problems just to make sure, and you will have fractions. That's why I put that fraction on that example, because they are in there. There's several of them in the IXL lesson. All right, so here, find the vertex in y equals x squared minus 6x. Now, we're missing our c, but that doesn't really have anything to do with finding the x coordinate, because remember, the x coordinate is just dealing with b and a. So let's identify a. A is the number in front of x squared, which is 1. And b is the number in front of x, which is negative 6. And so to find your x coordinate, it's going to be x equals negative b, which is negative 6, over 2 times a, which is 2 times 1, which is going to end up being positive 6 over 2. So we're going to get x equals 6 divided by 2, which is 3. All right, so we have our x coordinate. I hope this is getting a little bit easier for you, especially on the finding the x part. Now we want to take that answer for x and go back into our original problem and plug it into the x's in the problem to see what y is. So y is going to be 3 squared minus 6 times 3. And that's going to be 9 minus 18. And that's going to be negative 9. So our y coordinate is negative 9. Putting both of those together for our ordered pair for our vertex, we're going to get, and I'm going to write it up here, 3, negative 9. And that is our answer for our vertex. I'm going to put stars by those because I've got boxes around the others also, so you'll know that's the final answer. Okay, so we have gone over how to find the y-intercept, which is the easy part, how to find the axis of symmetry, which is the equation, x equals, and then finding the vertex. Now we're going to find the minimum value. Now look at what I've got down for the definition for minimum value. We saw this on the graph that we did in the last lesson. Remember, the minimum value was the y-coordinate of where the vertex was. Whenever you had, let's go back to this for a minute. Whenever you have your parabola and you have your vertex, remember that's some point x, y, and the minimum value was always the smallest, lowest point on that parabola, the y value of that lowest point. So we always, like, we went across and looked at what the y value was. Well, now you're not going to see it graphed, you're going to see it in the equation. So you just have to know what the y-coordinate is in your vertex. So basically, it's what we did up here, and the minimum value is going to be your answer for y. Alright, so we're going to have to find, whenever you find the minimum value, you're going to have to first of all find your vertex. So again, we're going to do just like we did in this example. We're going to identify A and B. A is 1 and B is 1. So we're going to find the x-coordinate in our vertex, which is negative B, which is negative 1, over 2 times A, which is 2 times 1. So we're going to get x equals negative 1 over 2. Uh-oh, fractions. Okay, so our x-coordinate is x equals negative 1/2. Now we've got to find the y-coordinate. So we're going to say y equals negative 1/2 squared plus 1/2 plus 10. Okay, so I'm going to stop for a minute, make sure you know what I've done. I found my x-coordinate, which came out to be negative 1 over 2, which is negative 1/2. So we go back and plug that negative 1/2 into the x in our original equation. So this is what we have, negative 1/2 squared. Uh-oh, I found a mistake. Plus negative 1/2, that should be a negative 1/2. Plus 10. Alright, so, and remember right here, I hope that didn't confuse you. Usually I write it as minus 1/2. But I left that off, and so I had to put plus negative 1/2. Okay, so now I'm going to get my calculator, my handy little calculator with my fraction key. Let me zoom in just a little so you can see that. Alright, so we're going to put in negative 1/2 in parentheses, negative 1/2. Oh, I did that again. I gotta delete that. Make sure you move your cursor to the end of the fraction so the parentheses will go around the whole thing. And then we got to square negative 1/2. And then it's either plus negative, or I'm just going to put minus in parentheses 1/2 in my parentheses, and then plus 10. Hit equals, and you get 39 over 4, and it's positive. Okay, so y equals 39 over 4. Alright, now, we don't have to write what the vertex is, because what you're finding is your minimum value. The minimum value is always the y-coordinate. I gotta slide that up now. It's always your y-coordinate. So your answer for the minimum value. Let me zoom out. Your answer for the minimum value is 39/4. Okay. Oh, that was a pretty long lesson. Does it make sense, Claire? You understand it? It'll probably take just some practice. And it'll help when you get your mom to bring home that calculator with a fraction key on it. All right, your assignment is IXL, Algebra 2, J2, and get a SMART score of 80. Make sure you're in Algebra 2. We're in the J's now. We're going to stay on Algebra 2. We're going to keep doing quadratic functions in the J's. SMART score of 80. You're welcome, and I hope you have a good afternoon. See you later. Bye.